So welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the very first evidence-based policymaking in Europe Summit 2021, co-organized by 5 projects: Policy Cloud, Decido, AI for Public Policy, DUE, and Intel Comp. Over the coming 2 days, we'll be looking at use cases and digital tools for improved decisions. My name is Marieke Willems from Trust IT and Policy Cloud, and I will be your moderator for today. Some housekeeping rules. You have entered in listen-only mode. We would like to ask you to keep muted while our amazing speakers will share their insights with you today. If you have any questions, of course, we are very happy to answer them in the panel discussion. You can enter them in the chat in the lower bottom of the interface, or you can raise your hand and we unmute you during the panel after the panel discussion. Okay, so let's start. So welcome to the very first evidence-based policymaking in Europe Summit 2021, organized by the Data-Driven Policy Cluster. We are very happy to say that we have reached over 200 registrants for the coming 2 days. That will promise some very nice discussions. We are kicking this summit off with the evidence-based policy cases from data to decision-making plenary session. And this is our agenda of this session. So after I very briefly welcome you to the Data-Driven Policy Cluster and the Evidence-Based Policymaking Summit in Europe, we have 5 amazing speakers lined up for you. Alan Pike from the OECD will speak about open research data for better policymaking. Then Andrea Halmos from DG Connect will talk about the EC policy helping local public administrations use of digital twins for evidence-informed decision-making. Then Claudia Fabo Cartas from EXA will talk about involving citizens in citizen science and how to contribute to evidence-based policymaking. Then Lieven Draes from the DUE project will talk about digital European urban twins for data-supported policymaking. And then we're very happy to have Michela Magas here, who will speak about evidence-based policymaking and frontier innovation. Then our 5 speakers will join us in the panel discussion from data to decision-making. These are our 5 amazing speakers of today. Thank you all for joining and being here with us. First, a little bit about who we are. So we are the Data-Driven Policy Cluster. We've come together to organize the Evidence-Based Policymaking Summit 2021. We've defined a joint roadmap where we have looked at our commonalities. So we're 5 H2020 research projects looking to use the European cloud infrastructure for public administrations. Together, we develop policy prediction tools that will help policymakers in data-driven decision-making. We do this in the co-creative development process, different ways, but all co-creative. We have 19 pilots, local, from health and climate change and to mobility and radicalization, very different topics, but all addressing policy-making challenges. Our pilots produce and reuse data. The added value of data-driven policymaking is what we've been looking at. So what we see is that we look at governance for the future today using European cloud infrastructure for public administration. So the slower process of policymaking needs to move to a more agile and responsive policymaking process. With better evidence-based policies that adapt really to the data that comes to light in any given moment. It should be trusted, understood, and contributed to by the relevant stakeholders. It also supports policymaking cycle stages at every stage, and it facilitates the process with technical tools. From local to European policies, how do we contribute as a group? Well, we create replicable solutions, also scalable tools. Different cities could even use the same tools. And we enable the data-driven policymaking at any level in public administration. And at the end of the story, we also identify a set of pathways, recommendations, and lessons learned. Of course, we also, from the local level, we also contribute to wider impacts on a political, economical, societal, and technical level. What I want to highlight here is, without going into the details of the impacts that we expect, is that our multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral teams explore the complexities of policymaking challenges. So including the challenges raised by big data users and the consideration of precautionary approaches to address policymaking. Our stakeholders, you are our stakeholders, the policymakers, research and academia, industry and citizens. So the data-driven policy cluster develops policy prediction tools that enable the public administration to reuse common infrastructures and data sets for the development of better targeted and more evidence-based policies. And co-creation, as I've mentioned earlier, and we're also Claudia will be talking about, is that the data-driven policy cluster engages the stakeholders in co-creation of the tools, and thereby we enhance the trust and we boost also the perceived legitimacy of the authorities. And we do this through numerous ways. Different projects have different ways, but here's a few. We work with hackathons and datathons, storytelling with data, gamification, community networking events, living labs, and opening data to solve public sector challenges. So before we move to the panel discussion, I want to give the floor to Ellen Pike. Ellen, while I briefly present you, you can make your slides ready. So Ellen Pike is Senior Policy Analyst in the Science and Technology Policy Division within the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. Ellen is in charge of various aspects of science and innovation policy, notably open access to data for science, technology, and innovation, innovation policy reviews for new member countries, and international cooperation in research and innovation for sustainable development. Ellen, thank you very much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marike, and this is a pleasure to speak at your distinguished event. I will tell you something about our work at the OECD, about open research data for better policy making. So I will start with this slide, which sets the scene. This is one of the responses we got to the survey we circulated concerning digital systems for innovation policy making, and you can see this this citation from New Zealand, which says, you know, that they had they set up a national research information system, and in order to improve the quality of science and innovation data and the reuse of data and sharing and linking data. And they were unable to answer quite basic questions such as public investment, particular areas of research, and so on. So you see, they have established this national research information system to get around these problems. If we look at what happened during the pandemic, research and other data was used as input to policymaking. Epidemiological data and studies about the spread of the pandemic, clinical data, lethality and other impacts on public health, mobility data, monitoring the lockdown measures by seeing how people restricted their mobility, the consumer behavior of different consumers during the pandemic, response of economic agents, sociological data on acceptability of measures. So these are just some examples which were used, and we know the issues which existed with these data, that these data were not always of the best quality, and that in a world of uncertainty, policymakers had to make decisions based on imperfect data. And and in addition to that, there was issues with misuse of data and spread of fake news based on data or quasi data or badly interpreted data. So there is also a policy brief about use of open science during COVID-19, and the link is given here. Now, internationally, there are many initiatives which concern enhanced access to data, especially research data. You see there's a number of OECD instruments in the left box here. There are other international initiatives, of course, with the European Commission leading recommendation to 2012 and then 2018 recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information. There are the FAIR principles, which are being promoted by the European Commission and many countries around the world, not only in Europe, International Open Data Charter, and so on, the science clouds, and so on and so forth. So the work streams in OECD, the most recent work streams are, and there was a policy report published about enhanced access to publicly funded data for science, technology, and innovation. There was the 2021 revision of the OECD recommendation of the Council concerning access to research data from public funding. This is one of my main projects. And then there is just a month ago, we adopted the recommendation of the Council for enhancing access to and sharing of data, which is broader, covers also private and all public data, not just research data. Now, the recommendation for access to research data from public funding, which was revised this year, has 7 pillars. It builds upon a previous version of the recommendation, which was existing since 2006. But we have now updated and upgraded this recommendation. And we have these 7 pillars, which cover not only the research data, but also metadata, algorithms, workflows, models, and software, including code. So we are enlarging it to what we call digital objects. And you have these 7 pillars. And briefly, I will explain what those 7 pillars are. You can look at the full text under the link below. The first pillar is data governance for trust. It's basically saying that open access should be by default open access, but we do recognize that, of course, there are some cases where for reasons of privacy and the national security and other legitimate interests, you may not be able to open the data freely. And in these cases, you have to explore ways to enable access to researchers for more restricted use and with certified and users which are not going to put in peril those principles of privacy and others. You have to mitigate the risks. You have to consult your stakeholders who are the owners of this subjects of this data. Second pillar is about technical standards and practices. This is about the FAIR principles. It's also about promoting open standards internationally, which should be openly accessible and consultable. The third pillar is about incentives and rewards. This is about the responsible data and software management by researchers. This is also enabling new uses of data, for instance, like data mining for AI. This is also about having information about the rights in the metadata so that when an algorithm comes, it knows whether it can use and with what rights it can use the data, and to promote open licenses wherever it is possible. Then we have the incentives, reward and recognition for the researchers. And this is very important because very often the researchers are not necessarily well recognized for for making the data open. And this needs to be done very broadly. There has to be data citation. There should be also, this should be in the criteria for evaluation and so on. The fifth pillar is about sustainable infrastructure. We should prioritize short-term, medium-term, long-term infrastructures and have the matching funding with for the long term. Of course, it's the most expensive, but it should be done for the most valuable data. Then you have the human capital. It is about having the appropriate skills with the researchers, with the data stewards, and also with the general public, which needs to have the data literacy, and also providing attractive career paths for computer scientists, so that they can also stay in the research domain. And finally, last but not least, interoperable international cooperation for access to research data. Here, especially for the sensitive data, we need to have interoperable ethical and legal frameworks to be able to access sensitive data across borders. This is something which needs a lot of work. We would need to have a compatible certification about institutions and researchers, and also compatible assessment of sensitivity of data to agree on a common. This is like, a little bit like, you know, building a Schengen for data. So having a very sensitive issue here, like immigration, is also sensitive, but I think for data we need to have similar procedures. So then we just very briefly, I won't go into detail here. This is what the countries are building as digital science and innovation policy infrastructure, starting from the different data sources on the left. And then in the middle, you see these what we call interoperability enablers. It's about you know, ontologies for dissemination. There's standards for access. There's protocols for compilation. There's APIs for visualization, and so on. And then the output is about creating then functions and mission statements, and reaching the users who are government agencies and public funders and higher education institutions, and so on and so forth. We had a survey of digital systems and for innovation policy. We can see here that the major actors here are ministries and funding organizations, sometimes also people, public research organizations. We also see that the openness of these DCEP systems are only in 1/3 of the cases who have fully open systems, and very often they're partially open or even not open at all. The rationales are to provide insights at different points in the policy cycle, to streamline the workflows, to reduce the administrative burden on researchers and research performing organizations, to act also as unique one-stop integrators, providing a real-time whole of system perspective, and support the general information discovery. The challenges very often is data quality. In most cases is data quality and interoperability. Funding is also mentioned, regulation, and others here. The additional difficulties are, you know, technological backwardness of the general government systems, the competencies of government officials to use those DCEP system, and a lack of national coordination and strategy. And for the end, just a very brief overview of the case study of Norway. There is a publication about that. I can share that if somebody is interested. Basically, Norway has a very strong legacy of comprehensive administrative records, very good accountability and evaluation culture. There's a societal consensus since the citizens really believe that you know, data is well used by public authorities. You have strong institutions like Statistics Norway and Kristin, and you have integration and interoperability progressing. However, there are areas for improvement. You can improve the skills in digital technologies and data sets, which cover an international dimension. And there are remaining issues of fragmentation and scale between the different agencies. We recommended the creation of an interagency digital coordination working group. We recommend also to further develop interoperability through compatibility of standards and identifiers across domestic actors and internationally, and improve also access to data about STI generated in the system. And finally, in the make or buy decision, Norway has developed a lot of own systems, but perhaps in some cases off-the-shelf solutions could be used for greater efficiency. So that's this from me. Here you have additional readings here for reference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. It was very interesting that you advocate for Schengen for data, for better data quality, more interoperability, and above all, access, improved access to data. Our next speaker for today is Andrea Halmos. Andrea, while you set your slides in place, I will briefly present you. Andrea Halmos works at the EC as a policy officer in technologies for smart communities in the unit of DG Connect. Her current activities focus on helping cities and communities to better harness data and artificial intelligence in order to meet their environmental and climate objectives, provide high quality services in order to meet their environment and climate objectives, provide high quality services to citizens and businesses, and make better informed decisions. Andrea, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and really to be able to listen to the wealth of knowledge and experience of these projects around evidence-based policy making. And I was asked to talk a little bit about EC policy, helping local public administrations, in particular using digital twins for evidence-informed decision making. And as explained, I focus on the local level, but of course, a lot of this experience could be extrapolated to other levels of government. And what I will focus on is how we've come a long way to really recognize how more and more data and related technologies have been helping public administrations in their policy making, and what could be the next phase. If I look at policy making cycle, this is, by the way, an excellent booklet that we have produced among Commission services called The Quality of Public Administration, a Toolbox for Practitioners, which identified a number of chapters, of course, each time where digital can also help. And the chapter on policy making puts forward this very classical model for policy making cycle. And if you already look at that, of course, we can identify each and every step of the way that would benefit from data, big data, or data analytics, identifying the problem, formulating the policy, deciding, implementing, evaluating. And of course, if we look at the qualities of good policy making, which the booklet puts forward on policy design, analyzing big data, forward thinking, consultation, these also would benefit from data and technologies. And it's very funny because when preparing for this workshop, I remember that we did have a data for policy project in 2016. And in that context, the trends that were put forward were kind of like, where is it going? There will be more data, there will be more visualization tools, there will be more data used for policy making, but also in terms of more data analytics. And what they were looking at is that, in fact, they already at that time looked at smart cities will be kind of, in a way, perhaps even more ahead of their national administrations, because it's a let's say a smaller scale environment ecosystem where there's a possibility for public-private partnerships, where the sensor networks collect a lot of data, and where they can really show or demonstrate the benefits of big data to their citizens. And this is where we are today. So let me just move this out from here. And today, in 2021, we actually have quite a number of so-called local digital twins in the EU. So some of them you will hear and throughout European projects such as Duet, but also LEAD and Compare and others that use digital twins for visualize, for model different data to be able to make more evidence-informed decisions. So we've also looked around the EU, and there's quite a number of cities, as I said, sometimes regions, but also in some cases, even national digital twins in the making. So what is this concept of a digital twin? Perhaps no need to explain to you, but the way we consider it is that it's a very powerful means to allow public administrations to pull together data, essentially data from different domains, which is already a huge advantage, bringing together and breaking down silos between the different departments, for example, in order to make, for example, create dashboards, understand the current situation, in order to make very quick operational decisions, for example, in terms of traffic management, but also by becoming ever more complex and sophisticated, they may also be able to provide strategic long-term predictions and what-if scenarios, and be able to help cities, for example, in their integrated urban planning, pulling together data from different domains, essentially also creating an integrated process and framework for the administration to work together and look at the different potential of the proposed decisions. And what we see is that apart from certainly more evidence-informed decisions and more cost efficiencies, there's also quite a number of promising results in terms of meeting, for example, objectives related to the Green Deal. What are then the challenges, and that will actually explain what we do at EC level? What we see is indeed that many cities or local administrations work in by department and focus on one or the other vertical or domain, and very rarely come together and look at these in combination. And really that's where a lot of, first of all, innovation would come from, but also a lot of the knowledge. The solutions often stay fragmented. So we see a lot of extremely useful and very interesting solutions, but they oftentimes stay at a corner or in a neighborhood or in a city, and very rarely or very difficult to scale them up at EU level. And I took this from the Duet. I hope you allow me. I mentioned the source. It was a striking number. Apparently only 12% of city data is used for policy making, although a lot of data is collected at local level, for example. And of course, let's not forget that while digital twins is one thing in a manufacturing context, really for administration cities in an urban context, it requires very specific approaches and also different capacities and skills that is not obvious in the public sector. The way we approach it at EC level is to focus on 3 specific layers that can help enable the digital, let's say, put in place digital enablers that would help administrations to arrive to this kind of very sophisticated tools. We're trying to help get access to data that the administrations would need, ensuring interoperable local data platforms in order to manage this data and the stakeholders, and then help them build the capacity to implement digital twins. And we do that driven by a political movement of mostly local, but also regional and national administrations called the Living in EU. And I will explain all these 4 elements in a moment. So Living in EU is a community, as I said, driven by cities and city administrations, but also including regions and national administrations that have signed a declaration committing to a set of principles and EU values that they will go through the digital transformation of their administration in the European way, meaning really trying to implement interoperable open standards-based solutions, so they would not be locked into certain situations. They would have the possibility to take control or keep control of the citizens' data, and a number of other principles such as ethical AI, ethical data use, and so on. This is still available for signing. We already have about 100 signatures, but also over 70 supporters. And supporters can be also companies and other organizations that kind of subscribe to the same principles. In terms of data, so as I said, while we're trying to help administrations get access to data, we've been a long time talking about the idea of course, open data and the potential that it could bring to innovation. The data strategy at the EU level recognizes that it's not necessarily always open data that is mostly needed. So it puts forward the idea of creating an EU common data space. And the way to do that is by creating some sectoral or thematic data spaces. to be able to create a secure environment where data can be shared. And this data can under certain conditions. And this data can be public data, public but sensitive, so not open data. It could also be business data. So in a context of a city, could be, of course, utilities data, could be data, traffic management companies, short-term rental companies, and so on, that cities would love to have in order to be able to better manage their operations. It could also be personal data and so on, in order to really create cross-sectoral portable services and allow cities to get access to similar data sets under similar conditions. So we will actually create or fund the creation of a smart communities data space. We also had cities put in place interoperable urban data platforms. The standards have been agreed upon and validated through pilots and are now integral part of this Living in EU declaration, really to be able to pull together the various data platforms that a city or an administration may have, ensure interoperability, ensure that it can grow, like have the flexibility to select new suppliers and it expands, include all kinds of stakeholders, and really allow to manage the city operations in an effective way. And then, of course, we help the implementation of these digital twins through funding, and I'll explain that in a moment, but also through other policy means. For example, through this Living in the EU or Join, Boost, Sustain declaration, as it was also referred to. We also work with the administrations directly through a number of subgroups. For example, around financial aspects, we try to see what other financial means there may be that could help the implementation of digital twins. In terms of technical means, we work with the cities to identify how could cities procure fair and ethical AIs. How could some minimal interoperability mechanism could be created for data analytics. In terms of legal, we help cities interpret, of course, some of the most recent legislations, such as the AI Act or the Data Governance Act or the Data Act. And then in terms of education and capacity building, for sure, we're all the time trying to share good practice cases, but also work with initiatives that try to highlight these use cases, like the Barcelona initiative on an urban AI observatory, or the DT for Regions projects, which helps implementing AI at regional level, trying to collect a set of training material, how to implement digital twins in cities and so on. And we're putting forward the monitoring and measuring framework for local and regional administration. So there's many so-called assets to benefit from. But in terms of funding, one of our main funding schemes, and it's perhaps new to Horizon audience, is the Digital Europe program. It's the first ever program of the Commission to put substantial funding into creating digital capacity in the EU. And in this context, this is not a research, it's really on deployment and putting capacity on the ground, AI, HPC, cybersecurity, but also we have some, let's say, opportunities for the local level. We will fund the creation of a data space for climate neutral and smart communities. And we will have some funding to validate these in cross-domain pilots. We will help cities procure local data platforms that will be interoperable. And we will actually create a toolbox for local digital twins consisting of reusable tools. And of course, we will continue supporting this Living in EU community. And perhaps you have heard of the new European Bauhaus, where we will try to pull together digital tools that can help create more aesthetic, more sustainable, and more inclusive living environments. And we believe that, for example, digital twins could be a very useful tool here, for example, in terms of participatory urban planning. So this is where I would like to leave you, and I'll be happy to continue discussing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It was very interesting, the concepts that you introduced, the Living in the EU and the European Bauhaus. I also found it very interesting that you mentioned that only 12% of the city's data is used for policy making. And I'm sure Lieven will come back to that later in his presentation. Now I would like to give the floor to Claudia Fabel-Cartas. Claudia, while you are preparing your slides, I'll briefly introduce you. Claudia works at EXA as project officer for the EU Citizen Science Project, where she leads the work package on platform, community, and network building. Previously, she was also part of the organizing team of the Citizen Science SDG conference in October 2020 on citizen science's contribution to framing and achieving sustainable development. Claudia, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marika. Thank you very much for having me. So, as you said, I work at EXA, the European Citizen Science Association. So I'd like to give you a glance at what we do. So EXA is a membership non-profit organization established in 2014, located at the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin, that advocates for public participation in science and wants science to be more socially robust, inclusive, and democratic. Our over 200 members are from all over Europe, as well as Africa, Asia, Australia, North and South America, and represent all sectors of society. And so our mission is to mainstream citizen science in our network of citizens, politicians, and policymakers, scientists, and SMEs, and beyond. So I've said citizen science a few times. So what is citizen science? Examples of it are found in different scientific disciplines that interpret the term slightly differently. And here's one of many explanations or definitions of citizen science, which I will read out loud. Citizen science is any activity that involves the public in scientific research and thus has the potential to bring together science, policymakers, and society as a whole in an impactful way. Through citizen science, all people can participate in many stages of the scientific process, from the design of the research question to data collection and volunteer mapping, data interpretation and analysis, and to publication and dissemination of results. Citizen science is also an approach of scientific work that may be used as a part of a broader scientific activity. Yeah, so I want to touch on this very quickly. This is the Hackler 2013 typology of citizen science aimed at explaining different levels of participation in citizen science projects. Citizens can be involved in citizen science as sensors, so to say, for example, as your mobile phone collects data while you are doing other things, where citizens can use their own cognitive abilities in small tasks or for basic observations. This is the case of distributed intelligence. Citizens can also be involved in the project definition and data collection, while experts are involved in the design of appropriate methods in data analysis. This would be participatory science, or citizens can set the data collection, analysis, and action, while professional scientists act as facilitators in case they are involved. And this is extreme citizen science. So here is an overview of the Horizon 2020 projects in which EXA is involved or has been involved as a partner or third party. You see compare, which Andrea just mentioned. And I'll focus on some project results to show that citizen science generated data can be a valuable source of information for policymaking. So here we have the We Observe and Lancens as example. The We Observe project brought together several citizen observatory projects to share and consolidate knowledge and identify best practices. Many of the insights gained have been synthesized into a detailed research and innovation roadmap for future citizen observatories, which outlines focus areas, dedicated pathways, and proposed actions in each of them. And this will inform practitioners, policymakers, and funders of citizen observatories. And what I would like to highlight are two of the areas of the roadmap. One is area 2 on the bottom left, which is called robust data value chains. And citizen observatories revolve around the collection and provision of trustful data and evidence to inform and empower citizens, communities, as well as policy and decision making, and establishing trustworthy and suitable data collection and description pathways, ensuring alignment with existing standards, as well as providing transparent and suitable accreditation and IPR approaches enhances the acceptability and uptake potential of citizen observatories. And it's also worth mentioning Area 4, integration with official data frameworks and open data systems. Citizen observatories and citizen science projects successfully contribute to official flood monitoring and management, to SDG indicator monitoring, and to the validation or ground truthing of remote sensing and Earth observation data through providing in-situ observations. They also fill data gaps and expand scattered official monitoring systems with spatial and temporal high-density data. And a further example is LandSense, a Horizon 2020 project, and one of the observatories involved in We Observe, which built a citizen observatory for land use and land cover monitoring by connecting citizens with Earth observation data to transform current approaches to environmental decision-making. And the second example I'd like to show to you is DNOSES, which stands for Distributed Network for Other Sensing, Empowerment, and Sustainability. This project, which has just ended, aimed at empowering citizens with responsible research and innovation, citizen science, and co-creation tools to tackle other pollution. And DNOSES carried out 10 pilot case studies in 9 countries where citizens crowdsourced other observations. The data collected is useful for environmental authorities and other emitting activities, as it provides evidence and data showing geolocalized other perception in real time. And this data in turn can function as evidence to facilitate decision-making and increase trust from the community, demonstrating that their issues are important and addressed by their local or by the political leaders. And you can see here a screenshot of the app that has currently over 1,000 registered users in 5 continents and more than 10,000 other observations registered. And the last example is Cost for Cloud. This is a co-designed citizen observatory, but it's called Co-Designed Citizen Observatories for the EOS Cloud, which is developing 11 technological services to improve citizen observatories by helping them to increase the quantity and the quality of citizen science data and the long-term viability of the citizen observations. The project focuses on the field of environmental and biodiversity monitoring, and the image here on the slide shows a scheme with the co-designed phases that the different services will follow. And once they are ready, all services will be freely available in the European Open Science Cloud, digital platform that provides open access to data and tools for the scientific community. And here in Cost for Cloud, interoperability is essential to allow the integration of the developed services and resources in the EOS ecosystem and to find common vocabulary between citizen science observatories. And other interesting resources on citizen science aimed at policymakers are the EXA policy briefs on the EXA website and the recording and results of the high-level policy event organized by the EU Citizen Science Project titled Citizen Science for Policy Across Europe, and many other policy briefs that can be found on the EU Citizen Science platform under resources. And so what the examples that I showed you confirm that citizen science can not only contribute to science by collecting or generating data, but it also has an impact on society, for example, by tackling local issues, as we have seen in the example of DNOSES and other pollution. And in addition, citizen science can influence policies, and outputs from citizen science can be used for the implementation and monitoring of regulation. And citizen science can act as data collectors, as we've seen, although they can also have a bigger role in the policy cycle beyond data gathering, namely in agenda setting and the review of policies. And here is a quote from the Commission staff working document, Best Practices in Citizen Science for Environmental Monitoring. I will read aloud the first half of it. Citizen science activities offer an underused, cost-efficient additional source of knowledge and feedback in the monitoring of the environment and implementation of environment policies. This includes non-traditional data sources, analytical capacities, opportunities for engaging with citizens, and possibilities for knowledge exchange. And not only at the EU level, but also in terms of SDG indicator monitoring, citizen science generated data can play a big role. What you see here is an image from a study by Dilek Freisel and colleagues, who systematically reviewed the metadata and work plans on the 244 SDG indicators and identified past and ongoing citizen science initiatives that could directly or indirectly provide data for these indicators. They concluded that citizen science is already contributing to the monitoring of 5 SDG indicators. These are the ones in green, and that citizen science could contribute to further 76 indicators, representing 33% of the total. So the overall citizen science contributions in to each SDG in this image are summarized as pie charts. The 5 indicators that SDG currently contributes to are in green, and overall the greatest contribution of citizen science data to SDG monitoring is to call 15 life on land, 11 sustainable cities and communities, 3 good health and well-being, and 6 clean water and sanitation. And to support the contribution that citizen science makes in framing and achieving sustainable development, especially the SDGs, a declaration was produced within the framework of the CSSG conference and project, where over 60 authors from all over Europe participated in writing and editing the declaration, and a total of 290 individuals and institutions, organizations, and projects signed the declaration. The whole declaration is dedicated to the SDGs, but I'd like to highlight the first point of the first recommendation, which is harness the benefits of citizen science for the SDGs. And it says, through citizen science, citizens must be supported and encouraged to generate new scientific knowledge to support the SDGs in collaboration with policymakers, academia, research institutions, research funding agencies, researchers, citizens, and civil society organizations, and according to recognized and tested standards. I have omitted here the content of recommendations 2 and 3 to fit it in the slide, but you can read more on this in the project deliverable on Zenodo. And finally, to learn more about citizen science, you can visit EU Citizen Science, which is the platform built by and for the community during the EU Citizen Science project, which is a place to share knowledge, tools, and training and resources for citizen science. And although the project is ending this month, EXA will take over the management and development of the platform for at least 5 more years. And with this, I say thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Claudia. That was very interesting to understand how citizen science can contribute to policymaking. I think the words that really stuck were the empowerment, the trust, and the transparency that contribute to the policymaking process. Next speaker in line is Lieven Raas. Lieven, while you prepare your slides, I'll briefly present you. Lieven is an internationally recognized smart city expert at Information Flanders with responsibility for driving transformational change in government. He leads the high-profile DUE project and the Compare project. Both aim to create digital twins for more open and collaborative urban decisions related to the EU Green Deal. And Lieven also serves as a work group lead to the Open Geospatial Consortium. Lieven, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marike. Good morning, everyone. So I will present here today the Duet projects. In fact, the project itself builds further on the results regarding policy making of the former Polyvisu projects, and together with the Compare project and also the Urbanage project on digital twins. I think we can say that there is a kind of family of projects on European level dealing with digital twins and evidence-based decision making. So at the start of Duet project, and in fact proposal writing, we were thinking about how would the world look like if cities understand the real impact of change before making any crucial policy decisions. And this already reflects what we're trying to do in Duet on digital twins is about, let's say, the predictive element. How can we use data evidence to predict the impact of decisions, not only on one or in one political or policy, let's say policy sector, but also overarching different policy sectors. We all know that cities everywhere are becoming increasingly digital. There is more and more data available, and there are plenty of opportunities to make better use of the data that's available, and of course also to transform data into knowledge and into evidence. In the Duet project, we are using simulation models. And of course, there is a lot of computer infrastructure, IoT, to handle all that IoT and other data. So cloud computing plays an important role in the work we are doing, and was also part of the Duet call by the European Commission. And what you see here is one of the high performance computer infrastructures we are using at KUL in Belgium, in Flanders. From a government perspective, let's say starting building a digital twin is not starting from a white sheet of paper. In fact, when you want to start, you have to take care of the different elements in local communities today. And for example, local communities, regions are managing a lot of different operations. They have to deal with balancing their budgets, let's say efficient use of resources. For example, there are also issues and elements with the workforce, the people working in the local communities. Dealing with data, with big data, is not an easy thing. So there is a lot of knowledge needed in the organizations on different levels. So this all makes that, let's say, yeah, cities have to take care in this area of big data and complex data, take care of a lot of things. And of course, this also gives some pressure on organizations, and we are looking how urban digital twins can play a role here to overcome some of the problems. A digital twin itself, we believe that it can disrupt the status quo on different aspects. And I don't have to explain what a digital twin is, but mainly we see it as a digital replica or representation of a system, process, or place, which mimics its real world behavior. It's of course not an exact copy. So choices have to be made always on which data you use for your digital twin. I can also say that digital twins of cities are a more recent, let's say, look or let's say digital twin sector. It all started, in fact, in the make industry, and what you see here are some models used in the make industry. And I think compared with a city, there are less elements to take into account in the industry than in the city, which is of course a highly complex system with a lot of parties involved, a lot of data, different data that has to be processed and that has to become more interoperable as well. So in Duet, we try to bring entrepreneurial thinking, agile processes, and open innovation to government decision making. And there we have to connect legacy systems, make data more understandable and interoperable. We have to explore the real policy impact, and that is also related to the data you have and you want to use and you need to use. We want to influence better public decisions, but we also want to bring the results of those decisions also to the public, so that they can understand the impact, understand why decisions are taken. So in our view, in the Duet view, digital twins are not only an instrument for policymakers to use behind their desk, but also hopefully a kind of communication tool, and also a tool that can be used for citizen science, for example. We also want to experiment and innovate in our cities and across regions. And so that's also something we want to do in Duet, for example, by using gamification techniques and testing techniques. One of the most important things, and I think where Duet can and will make a difference on, let's say, many of the current digital twins, is that we want to focus on combining predictive data models and visualizations. And for us, this is key to understand the future impacts. We want to do that to make, of course, data easier to interpret, to provide integrated view of the cities, and also facilitate data-driven decision-making. So we hope that 3D, but in fact also 2D interfaces make the city intelligence easier to understand by all, so also including citizens. We want to do that by working on data literacy, delivering social goods, unlock innovation together with citizens and people working in and around the city. We want to measure and predict performance and bring together the different stakeholders' capabilities. I will just give you very briefly 3 examples to close my presentation. The first one is of the city of Pilsen, Czech Republic, where we are already using what-if analysis based on models, and where we in fact combine a traffic model. We can, for example, close a bridge, and that's what you see here below. We can, in a matter of seconds, calculate the effect on traffic. And based on that, we can also run an air quality model and a noise impact model. And here, for example, you see immediately the effect on air quality of closing that bridge. This afternoon, my colleague Yuri Buchal from Pilsen will give more information about this pilot in particular. The Antwerp case, here we are using live data to predict how people are moving around the city and the city center, and especially this kind of application was really helpful during the pandemic. A third case is in Athens, and it will be also presented today, the Athens digital twin. And this is one example where people will or can see shady areas in the city. And in fact, let's say the city can use this digital twin to take some measures, for example, during hot periods in the summer, to show people where there are places to rest and so on in the city. So this is also about providing personal services to citizens. So those are some of the examples of the Duet project, and we hope you can also join our communities of the different projects here involved today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lieven. Thanks a lot for those examples of the digital twins. Our next speaker is Michela Magas. Michela, while I'll briefly present you, you can start setting your slides in place. Michela Magas bridges the world of science and art, design and technology, and academic research and industry with a track record of over 25 years of innovation. She is innovation advisor to the European Commission and the G7 leaders, creator of the Industry Commons, and member of President von der Leyen's high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus. She sits on the advisory board of CERN ID Square, the CERN space for frontier innovation. Michela, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and I hope you can see my first slide.
Perfect.
I'm excellent. So, as you have very kindly mentioned, let me just see if it will work. I am very privileged to be part of President von der Leyen's high-level roundtable with these wonderful people here, and including Commissioners Gabriel and Ferreira. And this is very much a space for co-creation with all of these people in the photograph here. And it is very much about feeding policy directly from the grassroots. So what does that mean in practice? It means that we can actually experiment with communities, as has been mentioned now in several presentations, engagement of citizens, engagement of experts on the ground, and creative practitioners, as well as scientists, basically wonderful combinations of cross-disciplinary practice. And I want to illustrate this through a couple of examples. For instance, in this case, we were running a lab together with Slush, which you're probably aware of, is one of the biggest world conventions of startups and investors. And we discovered that a vocal coach who is very proud to be a blind singer was able to use brain-computer interfaces far more fluidly, about a degree of magnitude better than the people in the room who would have perhaps in the previous mechanically conditioned era been considered as able-bodied. And this has huge implications on the future of work, but we would never have been able to deduce that unless we had actually tried it. So maybe the first thing to note, and I think it actually is in this community already a paradigm shift, is that living labs are not just for validation of policy, but they are actually for creation of policy. And I think this has been demonstrated by some of our colleagues. Another example is, this is an Iranian inventor. In 2016, when all of those borders were being closed with immigrants, this Iranian inventor took part in our labs and came up with a breakthrough innovation. And the assumption was that the providers of the background IP would be the main clients for this innovation. But actually turned out that it was a really breakthrough for heavy vehicles from the primary industry. And it turned out that because there was a market adoption readiness from a particular sector, that we were actually looking for data in the wrong place. So as a result of this, I developed, together with the Connect Advisory Forum, market adoption readiness levels parameters for how we collect the data about market adoption. And this was actually selected as one of the top 3 innovation recommendations for Oettinger at the time. So when it comes to cities, and we heard some really wonderful presentations about cities, and I'm really pleased to see what these projects are doing for this, because they are really pushing our mental models about the cities, because I believe that city governments haven't moved really to the next paradigm. And this is very comparable to the situation we had with the early internet. So with the internet, we assumed it was about information delivery and about downloads. And then it became apparent that it was about content creation and about uploads. And this is where I think city governments need to shift their paradigm. So basically, when we were asked by the G7 leaders, and I was again privileged to represent the European Commission as advisor for innovation to the G7 leaders, we were asked, how should they use digital technologies to interact with their citizens? And everybody assumed the answer was create a website. My answer was, actually, your data-enabled bicycle sharing schemes, your data-enabled public buildings or cultural heritage are your interface with your citizens. And it's actually about co-creation on the ground. So we pushed the paradigms with these experimentations on the ground very, very fast. So here we were challenging, for instance, as part of the AI Innovation Lab at Örebro University in Sweden, we were challenging the Industry 4.0 paradigm of automation by placing the human in the loop and interacting with industrial robotics. So industry, as you're probably aware, in European policy has progressed very fast from 2017 to 2021, from Industry 4.0 automation to Industry 5.0 human-centric as the sort of dominant paradigm. But actually in the European Bauhaus, because we have to think about sustainability, we had to expand this paradigm already to be more than human, to include other species and other systems in an ecosystemic approach, because that's the only way we can deal with sustainability. And when it comes to inclusion, this is a nice snapshot from our Stockholm labs, just to demonstrate the level of inclusion of our labs, which actually happens very, very naturally. Now, it's because of a different starting point, which actually even challenges even the Industry 5.0 paradigm. So Industry 5.0 is really making an effort to include several categories of people into particular occupations where previously perhaps only one category would be admitted. Whereas with the idea of radical inclusion, which we have introduced in the European Bauhaus, the emphasis is on where we converge. So that's our starting point. So it completely it creates a different mental model of how we should deal with inclusion. And then this is another example of how we shift our perspectives. So this is Imogen Heap, a famous, worldwide famous artist, but also a blockchain activist. In this case, sending her voice to the moon via the Dwingeloo radio telescope in the north of Holland. 83 people in our labs, in our high-level labs, sent their voices to the moon, which bounced off the surface of the moon and back to them in an experience that actually then enabled them to position themselves and their work in terms of grand missions. And so whereas in Industry 5.0, of course, approaches the human-centric with upskilling, with traditional training, in the European Bauhaus, the future of work is driven by missions. And this is a really grand ambition, but it is demonstrably possible. So to round off this presentation, actually, how this has filtered through high-level policy, we have scaled all of our best practice into an industry-wide initiative called Industry Commons. It has massive uptake. It is really got a huge amount of partners globally, not just in Europe. All of the big industry are on board with the, Airbus, Bosch, Siemens, etc. But what's really important about cloud-based policymaking in this context is that we advocate for a system of systems, in this case, that is supporting, enabling systems that allow policy to create feedback loops that are built on systems of agreements, resilience, for instance, and ethics, responsible AI, and societal values, basically built on a series of European values that are inbuilt into our data systems, so that when breakthrough innovation happens on top of this industry commons, which is focusing on cross-domain interoperability, particularly at the beginning, creating a system of ontologies, it basically happens based on particular values and policies and concerns that we put into place. So just on my final slide, I always go back to the people, the brilliant minds that we can actually leverage to make really, really good policy. And we have demonstrated how this is possible. So I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Michela. I was very impressed by the human-centric going towards the more than human, the inclusion towards the radical inclusion, and then the upskilling via training through missions, actually. Thank you very much for those thoughts. So I want to invite all speakers to the panel discussion now. I will share my screen for this. We have put some questions in place already to get the thoughts running on this. I know we are a little bit more pressed for time now, so I would like to ask you for short, to the point answers. I know that you've addressed the why evidence-based policymaking in your presentations already, but I want you to give me one takeaway on why evidence-based policymaking from your point of view. Maybe Michela, you want to start off with this one?
Well, as I have just demonstrated, basically when we are driven, in an era that's driven by digital technologies, and it's pretty much all of our systems are data driven. When we connect this to the human and grassroots element on the ground, we are then able to really learn how these digital technologies are affecting both the future of work, our interactions as human beings, our ability to communicate, etc. And so all of the policies that now have to be built that are based on these new paradigm shifts learn directly from the grassroots in this sense. So we have learned some really valuable lessons, and we continue learning in this respect.
Thanks for this. So really sticking to the grassroots here. Claudia, maybe this is a cue for you. Could you provide me with like one takeaway on why evidence-based policy making from your point of view?
Yeah, sure. And also I'm agreeing with what Michela just said. Evidence-based policymaking encourages knowledge building, and we have the opportunity to engage the public and through citizen science, but not only through other kinds of participation, to produce new knowledge that will then inform new policies. So engaging the citizens from the beginning, democratizing the whole process, not only the democratic process, but also this scientific knowledge production. That's my quick take.
Thank you, Claudia. So democratizing the process. Alan, what's your take on this?
Okay, well, I would say the OECD motto is better policies for better lives. And I think the OECD is all about evidence-based policymaking. And, the origin of that is because, traditionally policy was often made based on ideological party lines, which were made to win elections. And unfortunately, that does not always guarantee optimal policies, these better policies for better lives. And so very often we have influences of ideology, of clientelism, trying to suit to your strong lobbying interests, which brought you to power. There's also demagogy. We see this very, very recently in some countries, including Western countries, how to please the masses, even with reasoning which is not sound and not rigorous. Okay. So in evidence-based provides a basis for rational decision-making. It is not, I believe we should do this, like I'm the political leader, I believe we should do this. Rather it is, we have some evidence that if we do this, this will be more beneficial to citizens. And it is a more rational and rigorous and systematic approach. And it is also based on the premise that policy decisions should be better informed by available evidence and should include rational analysis. And this is because, policy which is based on systematic evidence is seen to produce better outcomes. Now, there are caveats. Because building an evidence base is costly in time and money. Sometimes you have urgency. It dictates quick and pragmatic decisions. For instance, we have seen this in the pandemic. Sometimes we had to policymakers had to bring decisions based on incomplete and small uncertain data sets. You have analytical limitations. You have limited availability of data, limited empirical analysis. To be really, really rigorous, you need the empirical analysis with counterfactual. This is very often in practical situations difficult to achieve. And correlation isn't causation. So you can find some correlation, but it does not mean that if you do this, you will get that result, right? The question is also selective bias in selecting the evidence. You have cognitive biases. You have the ladder of inference. If you believe into something, then you will look for evidence which can actually back your belief. So policymaking is inherently a political process. There are different value systems. What is more important? A typical dilemma is creating a larger pie for everybody or distributing it fairly, or is it more regulation, more freedom, and so on. So there are values which enter in there. Qualitative arguments are not always easy to compare. Policymaker is neither objective nor neutral. It is inherently political, right? And then there are also different stages, from agenda setting to formulation to implementation. So evidence has potential to influence the policymaking at different stages, but a different evidence and different mechanism may be needed at each policy stage. So
thanks. Great. So if we look at your answer, you also highlight the fact that the tools that could support the rational decision making, which leads me to the next question that I wanted to ask Lieven. So how can public authorities transform that usually slow and deliberative policymaking process to a process that is more agile, responsive, and trusted?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's of course a €1 million question, I could say. Very difficult to answer because, first of all, slow decision-making by public authorities, I think, are also partially due to the fact that governments has to deal with so many sectors in our society, and let's say integrating information, influencing all those sectors is of course time-consuming, and therefore I completely agree with Alan that this is the case, and the more information you want to bring in the process, even the more difficult it will become to make faster decisions. So I think one element I see on evidence-based decision-making is that in many documents, discussions, Many people believe that you need a full insight and you need almost all the available information to take your decision on. And I think in practice, this is impossible to achieve for various reasons. So I think being convinced and that working with maybe the second best option to create evidence, which is probably faster than, let's say, having the overall view about everything, is something we have to deal with, we have to do in practice if we want to become agile, responsive, and trusted. So I think also that there is extra knowledge needed on, let's say, what is the level of trust, what is the level of information we need to, let's say, build a decision on. And I think that's an important element to add to the discussion.
Thank you, Liv. And I find it very interesting. It also connects to Andrea's presentation earlier on, where only 12% of the data is used in European policymaking. Andrea, that leads me to the next question. So how do the local policy challenges extrapolate to Europe? You already discussed this in your presentation, but I would like to understand if you have like a takeaway for us on this.
I think what the challenges are manifold, but at the end of the day, there are, if we look at it from a technological point of view, there are some clear trends in terms of challenges. And I think many will argue that access to data, appropriate data in similar models, and appropriate tools to visualize that and make that useful information and knowledge is one of them. Another challenge, and I think I was just listening to the other speakers, I really find that evidence-based policy making can somehow address the challenge of decreasing trust in governments, you know? So it's and for both previous questions, if we are faced by the fact that, you know, the public is expecting the governments to make ever more speedy and clearly reactive decisions and ever more evidence-informed decisions, then this is an important tool both for accountability but also for increasing trust. And this is something is a challenge that I think we could bring these experiences from local level to a European level, and for example, putting in place dashboards, analytical tools and models could be a first way to start. And I would also start by looking at perhaps effectiveness of past decisions. That is perhaps less risky, and just to learn from the tools, and then start bringing it into real life and make more real-time or eventually even predictive decisions.
Thank you, Andrea. So effectiveness of past decisions, that's a very interesting one. And also increasing the trust, I think that is something very important that we've seen across the various presentations today. Michela, can I invite you to give your take on how the local policymaking challenges can be extrapolated to Europe?
So what we're currently advocating for, especially in the European Bauhaus, is to roll out across the regions a whole series of hands-on prototyping and engagement incentives. And basically what we're trying to do is create a virtuous cycle. So if we can collect best practice from the ground, from all the regions, we can feed that to policy as recommendations, and then policy can work on the missions from their side. And basically the policymakers can then create the mechanisms that can further support engagement on the ground, and then we get a virtuous cycle. That means that it very much builds on what Andrea has also mentioned, which is the idea that we are building trust, and we are building basically there's greater engagement from citizens. Hands-on engagement means that they can see the effects of their engagement reflected in policy. So there is a more direct connection. So if we, of course, data systems, and for that we need interoperability. Definitely, because we're working across sectors, we're working across different domains of knowledge, different areas of activity. Interoperability, as of course my colleague from OECD, Alain, has also emphasized, also helps us to build understanding, a space for common understanding, and also these levels of trust.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Interoperability, data interoperability. Alan, I don't know if you want to add something to that, because I think that it was very relevant also from your presentation.
Yes, I think I have nothing to add at this point.
Thank you. Luigi, I don't know if we have any questions from the audience that need to be addressed in the chat before we ended. I saw that most of them were already addressed by the speakers. Thanks for that. Okay, I think
the best thing, if anyone has a burning question, seeing as the chat has been going quite lively, if anyone has a burning question, to ask it now.
Exactly. Thanks, Zach. No, okay, then we continue with the last two questions that I really want the panel to answer. Oliver, you have a question.
Yes, I'm wondering if evidence-based policymaking shouldn't get more mandatory for policymakers and for Govs building the foundations for evidence-based policymaking. I'm not sure if it's enough to show the benefits. After over 10 years of open government and open data, especially for Germany, I can say it's still difficult. So the question is, I also have put to the chat, do we need a legal framework for evidence-based policymaking like the US has?
Thanks, Oliver. Michaela, do you want to take this question?
I would just like to get a few more bits of information from Oliver about the German. I can see that he was posting links, but it's impossible for us speakers to follow in the chat all the links. So if you could please elaborate a little bit about the challenges you're facing in Germany.
The challenges in open data, which is one of the main foundations to have evidence-based policymaking, beside the learning process for the politicians and the govs, is that we are so strongly federal constituted, and we have open data law on a national level. The second open data law, which is mainly following EU's regulation, so we need the EU for that. And we have all this state level, which some have open data laws and some don't have open data laws. And the problem is we have a connectivity principle, which means that the local level can find the state level for efforts to provide data. So all these discussions on like the governance and the provision of data and the data infrastructures are mainly put on the back on open data, instead of discussing generally what do we expect as data-driven governments in the future. So this is the one problem, and they don't make laws on state level which take the local level in account. So there is not really for the middle. It's for the future. It's still difficult to get local open data, and in addition to that, there are many other things. So they see business cases in their local data and don't understand that they're trying to have business cases, but they don't get them fly. So it's mostly about keeping the data on the local level closed.
Right, I get you. So basically, as always with these systems, and I mean, I think we have this huge question of incentivizing people to release data. We have big issues with that throughout industry. We have issues with that, for instance, with European Open Science Cloud. We have issues in local governments. This has been well documented, it's well known. And of course, it stifles business, because if I'm correct in understanding what you're saying, is that the local businesses would actually benefit from building their business using this data. or enhancing their business by using this data if it was made available to them. Am I correct in interpreting what you said?
It's just open, like there are two laws I find very interesting. There is the French law for the Loi République Numérique, which means the law for the digital republic. They define the republic in the digital space, and they say data from the governments are generally open and reusable and without costs, also with code built in governments. And you have the law from the US, it's the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policy Act, where they have put open data in the center, because they said we need a law for the governments to build the foundations for policymakers and to have the data really flowing inside the organizations, but also outside the organizations for evidence-based policymaking. They made this open data topic much stronger by putting it into the evidence-based policymaking law. And you have much more benefits for stakeholders, or much more stakeholders in general, like I wrote, for example, the people responsible for better regulation. So better regulation has a lot to do with evidence-based. And this is where OECD and also the EU's guidelines put a lot of pressure on. So to do really good, better regulation, you need good participative processes. You have to speed up your regulation. This is very important in Germany right now. And for that, you need more evidence base.
But I think, Oliver, maybe Lieven, you raised your hand also for this. I think you want to contribute to this discussion as well.
Yes, sure. Of course, Oliver, I completely agree about the necessity of opening government data. On the other hand, I also want to say that based on our experience from the former Polyvisu project, that this is a first step, and there is a huge gap between providing open data, which for me is important, in fact, in creating a level playing field on data. But on the other hand, stepping up from having the data towards, let's say, providing knowledge to the people in our cities and regions is playing in another league. And from the experiences in Polyvisu, we provided there, let's say, open data towards policymakers. But at the end of the process, in fact, they asked, okay, can you provide us the processed data, the knowledge behind the visualizations of the data, because that's what we need in our discussions. So I'm afraid that setting up wonderful and great open data portals and so on are only a first step and an important step, but it's still far away, I think, from, let's say, the final goal of providing evidence towards citizens, other policymakers, or policymakers in other sectors in our governments and beyond. So there is still a way to go, even when the open data should be there, and let's say the laws like in France and the US are completely applied.
Thank you, Lieven. Thanks.
Just to add one thing, there is also evidence-based needs on civil society, because we have strong civil society organizations doing oversight activities on the decisions and on the doing of politics, and really data analytics to show politics what can be done better. So it's not only the politics themselves or the politicians and the govs, it's also the civil society who need the instruments for evidence-based.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so we need to close this the plenary session, but I wanted to ask our speakers to give us one recommendation to the cluster of projects that is organizing the summit when looking to foster evidence-based policymaking. If you have one recommendation to give us, what would it be? Can you phrase this in one sentence so that we can, with those thoughts, we can close the plenary session? Alan, do you want to provide us with one recommendation?
Yes. So I would say, one recommendation would be vigilant about the data quality and usability, and having vigilance about potential bias, because we know that whenever you use, especially when you use AI algorithm, you tend to reproduce the past biases, and such as racial or gender or whatever bias there could be. This is very often reproduced by AI. And then for the rest, I would say, as in any AI system, I would just mention that the OECD has adopted the OECD principles for responsible AI. And so the AI principles, which have been then taken over also by the G20. So I won't go into the details, but if you just type OECD AI principles, you will find all these principles, which are very useful, and I think you have to keep them in mind in this initiative as well.
Thank you. Vigilant about data quality and biases. Thank you. Andrea, do you have one sentence for us?
I'd like to suggest that the projects are, of course, producing a lot of knowledge and experience, and at least from a Commission's point of view, it'd be great to capture all that. So I'm really hoping to see some nice outputs and policy recommendations and findings. But also, it would be great if there could be some kind of an indicator, framework, or KPI or business case that could be eventually used to demonstrate to governments, public administrations, why to use evidence-informed policymaking. We recognize that, of course, there's a lot of qualifiable benefits, quantifiable probably much less, but if there was like one possible assessment framework and some kind of concrete KPIs or outputs that could be demonstrated, that would be extremely helpful. Also, for example, to address what Oliver was saying earlier, how to demonstrate or how to encourage more and more use of evidence-informed policymaking.
Thank you. A KPI to assess the impact of evidence-based policymaking. Claudia, what's your one sentence for us?
My one sentence, looking at the roadmap for the data-driven policy cluster roadmap, when addressing co-creation, which you have mentioned in that roadmap, I would take enough time to meet the general public and citizens where they're at, to give recognition for their contributions, so that trust is fostered. And as you have pointed out in the roadmap, to avoid the not invented here syndrome, to really develop solutions built by the stakeholders that you want to target.
Thank you. Build trust and work a lot with the citizens in co-creation process. Thank you. Michela, your one sentence for us.
Sure. Well, I would sort of build on what's been said. I would encourage hands-on prototyping on the ground in an ongoing feedback loop, not just a snapshot. And supported by creating a space of common understanding across disciplines and across domains, with interoperability, of course, but also built in the system, in the data system, on EU principles of ethics, responsible AI, sustainability, and societal values.
Thank you very much. A common space, a space for common understanding and fostering interoperability. Thank you very much. Lieven, do you want to give the cluster one recommendation from your side as well?
Yeah, from a government perspective and also beyond, I think all what has been said until now is only possible with, let's say, enough investments, first of all in data, but also I think in data literacy, so in our human capital, in our organizations regarding data.
Data literacy and human capital, that's a very nice way to close this up. I want to thank all our speakers very much for all their energy, all their insights, and their great discussion in the final panel discussion. Thank you very much for joining us, for taking the time to be here. We're very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want, thanks. Then we continue with the next session here in the same room. So the next session entails the evidence-based policy cases, where we're going to pitch the tracks. This means that you get to hear what's going to happen in the next tracks. That's track 1, 2, and 3, health and social well-being, climate change, and mobility, where we will address evidence-based policy cases. So the pilots will enter, the pilot studies that each project is working on will enter in a discussion cross-project. So we will address this based on a topic level. And I would like to invite every moderator to pitch the session, to kindly invite all the speakers to join our sessions from 12:15 to 1:30. Because after that, we will come back to the wrap up at the plenary. The idea behind the different tracks is that you get to understand the landscape, you get to discuss this, you identify the challenges that are there on a policymaking level per track, and then the discussion leads to recommendations for policymakers. We will then make sure these are going to be written down in policy briefs for policymakers. Okay. Having said that, I would like to invite the 3 moderators to the stage: Germana Gianquinto from AI for Public Policy, Panagiotis Kokinakos from Decido, and Susie McAleer from DUE. Are you here?
Yes, hello.
Hi, Germana, how are you doing?
Hello, good morning, I'm fine. How are you, Marieke?
Good. Panagiotis, are you there?
Yes, good morning also from my side.
Hi, welcome. And Susie, are you there?
I'm here. Good to see you.
Thanks. So I have 3 slides, one for each of you, and you will pitch your session in 2 minutes to the audience. Then the audience gets to choose the track when we finish these 15 minutes. Don't run off yet. Do that only when you see that pop up in your screen. You can then choose your track. We first do the pitches, and we then want to ask also the audience a few questions through a Slido. So for now, I will pass to the next slide, and then Germana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. We have just a slight change in the speakers, but I mean, it's a very slight change. I have my colleague here instead of me presenting. So this pitch is about the health and well-being and the impact that COVID-19 had on our society and how we can address the challenges that we are now facing. So it is more and more an urgency that efficient public services can make life people's life easier, and the way that the citizen perceive public services is changing, and the awareness of the public administration is adapting to this perception and trying to improve it. So in our section, what we will try to focus is to define and to give the perspective on how to support this transformation. So we have Policy Cloud, Decido, AI for Public Policy, Duet, and Intercom as projects that have joined our forces to raise the awareness on the European cloud infrastructure for public administration. In our track, we will focus on health and well-being and on the added value of a data-driven policy making. The speakers that will be presenting are Paresa Marchianido from Technopolis Group, Intelcom, Armen Duza as Maggioli in Policy Cloud, and my colleague Giorgio da Bormida for the AI for Public Policy project. So I hope to see you on our track, and we are ready to start and present to you what our vision and missions are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Germana. Susie, Panagiotis, the floor is yours for this pitch.
Thank you very much. And also thank you for the organization and the very interesting discussions up to now. Our track number 2 relates to climate change and specifically what we can do in terms of evidence-based policies to slow down climate change. So we will be hosting 3 presentations Professor Phoebe Koundouri from the Athens University of Economics and Business will provide the first one from Intellicom. Then Mr. Antonio Filograna, the Senior Researcher and Project Manager and Engineering and expert in ICTs, will provide the second one, deriving from the CIDO, while Lilia Christandoni, Head of EU Project Sector in the and also scientific collaborator in the National Hellenic Research Foundation, will provide the third one. They will all deep dive us and all of the participants in the state of the art of research and innovation initiatives in a domain that is kind of self-proven in terms of importance. It's climate change. What can we say more? So please join us and help us shape the input towards policymakers in terms of policy briefs, policy recommendations, and other kinds of intelligence that we all might get to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Panagiotis. Susie, track 3, the floor is yours.
Hi there. We're the Smart Mobility track. I think, as everybody knows, transport forms the backbone of all our cities, and it's healthy functioning, can make or break, an experience. It affects the health and happiness of everyone who lives there. So it's a really important area for cities to get right. And whilst transport is a hugely innovative area, it's been opening a lot of data. All of us use our phones now to sort of navigate, to book, our travel and transport, between cities, through our cities. When it comes to policy making, things aren't quite so simple. Despite the data that's out there, because it's such a multidisciplinary area, things can be quite challenging. Some of you may have seen this week, the traffic information supplier INRIX launched a report saying that London is the most congested city, I think, now in the world. Yet last year it ranked 16th place. And part of that is because, these green policy measures the city put in place during the pandemic, installing new cycle lanes, has led to this congestion. So you can see things aren't quite so simple. So in our track, we're going to be discussing how new tools can help support better multidisciplinary policy making in the field of smart mobility. You'll hear from Pilsen about their innovative digital twin solution. That's part of the Duet project that Lethan talked about earlier. We're going to hear from Sophia about how they're crowdsourcing data involving citizens to make better policy. And last but not least, we'll hear from Cyprus about their work towards a more holistic and more accessible transport platform. So yeah, I'm standing between you and coffee. So please come join us, and we're looking forward to a healthy debate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Susie. So you've listened to the 3 tracks. What we want to do now is to ask you a few questions. So let me stop sharing for a second. Before we go to the tracks, we want to understand who you are. So hold off just a little bit before you enter a track. We want to understand who you are. So please join us at theslido.com. Enter the number 734520 or go straight with the QR code. We want then to ask you a few questions and understand who we are engaging with in this in the event. We want to know in which policy area or areas you are involved in. If you could please enter your area in theslido.com 734520. This helps us also understand who we are dealing with in the event, who we are engaging with in the tracks. Medicine, precision medicine, quality of life. Oh, that's a great one. Research management, research and innovation, climate adaptation, research and innovation, decision support systems, disaster risk management, communication, smart borders, sustainable fisheries, open government, city planning, digital transformation, citizen go design. That's great. Okay, you are all going to enjoy the tracks if I see what you're involved in. Okay, so let's go to the next question. How much of a difference do you think data-driven policy management tools and services would make in your job? So do you think they would make a big positive improvement? Yeah, they would be useful and make some difference, or more or less the same, or no, they would be a waste of time and money. So let us know what you think here. Okay, most of you think that they would make a big positive improvement. Some of you think, yeah, they would be useful and make some difference. Some of you more or less. Okay, I think we have a winner with they would make a big positive improvement. Okay, so join the next tracks and learn more about how we could help, how the different projects could help, and how you could provide us with feedback in doing so. Are you already using data-driven policy making tools? You can answer between yes a lot, yes somewhat, or no, not at all. Okay, most of you are already. Some of you somewhat, and some of you not at all. Okay, so please join the tracks and learn how it could benefit your work. Do you use your own organization's data, or do you need external data sources? You can answer between both own data and external sources, only our data, or only external source data. Okay, most of you use both own data and external sources. Okay, thanks a lot for this. Susie, Panagiotis, and Germana, this is interesting information that you can bring to the discussions in your tracks. Now you know who you're engaging with. And I would like to invite everybody to join the different breakout rooms and enjoy a coffee while we set this up. Join the breakouts now. You can have your coffee then, and then be back at 12:15. Thanks, everyone.